Chinedu was a man of incredible size. In a village where stature often mattered, his enormous frame stood out like a mountain against the plain. His belly, round and full, was a symbol of his indulgence in the good things of life, rich food, hearty laughter, and simple pleasures. His arms and legs were thick and strong, resembling the great trees of the forest that had witnessed the ages pass by. When he walked through the village market, the ground beneath him seemed to tremble slightly, as if the earth itself took note of his mighty presence. His face, broad and round, was framed by a beard that, though neatly trimmed, carried the remnants of his unyielding nature, his unspoken resilience. And his eyes, large and dark, were filled with wisdom, yet softened by a certain sadness, the kind only known to someone who had been repeatedly rejected. Despite his impressive size, Chinedu was a gentle soul. He worked hard each day at his food stall, which had become famous throughout the village of Umuahia. His jollof rice was unrivaled, a flavorful dish made with secret spices and a perfect balance of fire and smoke. His grilled chicken, tender and perfectly seasoned, was equally beloved by the villagers. The scent of his meals, rich and inviting, spread throughout the market, drawing a constant stream of customers to his stall. Even the children, who could never resist the aroma of freshly cooked food, would beg their mothers for a visit to Chinedu's stand. But despite his undeniable skill in the kitchen, there was one thing that Chinedu could never cook or perfect: love. No matter how many delicious meals he prepared, how much he gave to the villagers, or how kind he was to everyone, Chinedu remained alone. The women in the village, though they appreciated his food and admired his generosity, always found an excuse to refuse his proposals. He had tried, time and again, to approach them, his heart full of hope and his words wrapped in sincerity. But each time, the response was the same. "You're too large, Chinedu," they would say, offering polite smiles as if to soften the blow. "A man like you, well, you could never fit into a life like mine." His size, the very thing that made him strong and capable of so much, became the very reason for his heartache. The village had a narrow view of beauty, and to many, Chinedu's size was more of a burden than a blessing. His massive frame was seen as a flaw, something to be ignored, avoided, or even feared. The rejection weighed heavily on him, but he refused to show it. He had grown used to the dismissals, but the sadness in his heart never fully healed. As the years passed, Chinedu's food stall became a cornerstone of the village, and people came from far and wide to taste his cooking. His fame spread, and his wealth grew, but love, true love, remained elusive. His large hands, which expertly prepared meals that satisfied the hunger of many, longed to hold someone's hand, to be held in return. His heart, so full of compassion and understanding for everyone he met, was empty of the one thing he desired most: a companion. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Chinedu would close his store and walk home to his small house on the edge of the village. His home, though simple, was filled with the aroma of his cooking and the sound of soft music playing in the background. It was a peaceful life, but an empty one. He would sit down at his wooden table, a single meal set before him, and sigh deeply. He had become used to eating alone, his thoughts the only company he had. On some nights, he would look out at the village from his window, watching couples walking hand in hand through the streets, laughing, talking, and sharing moments of joy. He would smile at their happiness, but deep down, a pang of longing would hit him. He had never known that kind of love. He had never experienced the tenderness of a woman's touch or the warmth of a companion at his side. His size, his strength, and his heart, none of these had been enough to win a woman's love. His friends, the few who truly understood him, often encouraged him to keep trying. "One day, Chinedu," they would say, "you will find someone who looks beyond the surface and sees you for who you are." But even they couldn't ease the pain of his loneliness. As time wore on, Chinedu began to wonder if he would ever find that someone. He had accepted that his size was part of who he was, but the constant rejection made him question whether it would ever be enough for someone to see him as worthy of love. It wasn't his wealth, his food, or even his kindness that he doubted, it was himself. The image he saw reflected in others' eyes was not the image he wished to see. He was tired of being the gentle giant, the one with the biggest heart, but no one to share it with. And so, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Chinedu's hope began to fade. He threw himself deeper into his work, focusing on his food stall as if it could be a cure for his heartache. But even in his cooking, he could not escape the emptiness. The village continued to fill his plate with praise, but his own heart remained unfilled, yearning for the one thing he could not have. But little did Chinedu know, his life was about to change. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the village square. The day was winding down, but the market was still bustling, filled with the sounds of vendors calling out their goods, the laughter of children running between the stalls, and the occasional clink of coins exchanging hands. Amidst all the noise, Chinedu stood behind his food stall, his large hands expertly stirring a steaming pot of jollof rice, the rich aroma of spices and smoke curling into the air. He had served dozens of people that day, farmers, traders, villagers, and visitors who came from surrounding areas to taste his famous dishes. Despite his fame, the faces remained the same. There were the regulars who stopped by for their daily dose of comfort food, but there were also the familiar, polite smiles from the women who passed his stall, exchanging pleasantries before quickly moving on. As Chinedu flipped a piece of chicken onto the grill, he noticed a figure walking toward him that caught his eye. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the bustling market, her presence a quiet contrast to the chaos around her. A woman with an elegance that whispered of something deeper, a calm strength, a quiet power. Olamide. She was tall and striking, her dark skin glowing like polished ebony in the late afternoon light. Her long braids cascaded down her back, and she wore a simple yet beautiful green dress that complemented her features. As she drew closer, Chinedu couldn't help but notice the way she carried herself, confident, yet serene. Unlike the other women who occasionally walked by his stall, there was no hint of the usual pity or judgment in her eyes. Chinedu wiped his hands on his apron, preparing to greet her. His heart, which had grown used to the indifference of those around him, quickened just slightly. He didn't know why. Perhaps it was because she had an air of quiet confidence that made her stand out. Or maybe it was something more. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her was different. "Good evening, sir," she said as she approached, her voice soft but warm. "I've heard about your cooking for some time now, but I've never had the chance to try it myself." Chinedu smiled, his usual warmth shining through. "Good evening, madam. You are very welcome. What can I prepare for you today?" Olamide looked at the offerings with a thoughtful expression before making her decision. "I'll have the jollof rice with grilled chicken," she said, her eyes meeting his, a spark of curiosity in them. As Chinedu prepared her meal, Olamide watched with interest. She had heard the stories, how Chinedu's food could bring joy to even the most tired soul, how it could heal wounds you didn't even know you had. But what intrigued her most was the man himself. In a village that placed such an emphasis on outward beauty and status, she had heard little of Chinedu's character beyond his size and his food. What was he really like, beneath all that weight, beneath the food and the stories? Chinedu finished her order and placed the plate before her with a flourish, his eyes meeting hers with a slight hint of uncertainty. "Here you go, madam. Please, enjoy." Olamide took a bite, and her eyes closed for a brief moment as the flavors danced on her tongue. She had expected good food, of course, after all, Chinedu was famous for his cooking. But what she didn't expect was how deeply comforting and fulfilling it would be. The jollof rice was perfectly cooked, with just the right amount of heat. The chicken was tender, grilled to perfection with a smoky flavor that seemed to envelop the senses. "This is incredible," she said, her voice filled with surprise and admiration. She looked up at Chinedu, her eyes bright. "I've never tasted anything like this. The spices, they tell a story." Chinedu, who was accustomed to compliments on his cooking, felt a wave of pride wash over him. But it was the way she spoke, how she seemed to truly feel the food, as if she could understand the effort that went into it, that made his chest swell with emotion. "Thank you, madam," he replied humbly. "It's a recipe passed down through my family, something I've been perfecting for years." They exchanged a few more words, and to Chinedu's surprise, the conversation flowed easily. She wasn't simply a customer, she was genuinely interested in him, in his work, in the history of his cooking. It was different from the usual casual small talk he had grown used to. He found himself laughing at her sharp wit, the way she spoke with an intelligence that seemed to challenge him in the most unexpected ways. "Tell me," Olamide asked as she savored the last bite of chicken, "how did you come to open this store?" Chinedu paused for a moment, thinking about the years he'd spent building his business. "It started out of necessity," he said. "I wanted to provide for myself and my family, to honor the legacy of my ancestors. Cooking has always been a part of who I am. It's more than just food, it's a way of connecting with people. My size, well, it's something people see, but it's not who I am." Olamide nodded, as if reflecting on his words. "It's funny, isn't it?" she mused. "How people are quick to judge others based on what they see, not who they are." Chinedu glanced up at her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Yes, it is." They continued talking, and the evening passed by quickly. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Olamide stood to leave. "Thank you for the meal, Chinedu," she said, her smile soft but genuine. It was more than just food. It was a gift. Chinedu felt a warmth in his chest, the kind that came from being truly seen, for the first time in a long while. "It was my pleasure, Olamide," he said, the words coming out more softly than he intended. "I hope you return soon." Olamide paused, turning back to him with a thoughtful expression. "I will," she said. I think there's more to you than meets the eye, Chinedu. Much more." And with that, she walked away, her steps light and confident, leaving Chinedu standing there, feeling a strange mixture of hope and uncertainty. For the next few days, Chinedu found himself unable to stop thinking about Olamide. Her visit had been like a spark, igniting something deep within him. Her kindness, her genuine interest in his cooking, and her understanding of who he was had made him feel seen. It was a feeling he had longed for, yet never truly expected to find. And as he prepared his store for another busy day, he found himself wondering if perhaps, just maybe, there was more to this connection than just a simple exchange of food for coins. The days turned into weeks, and each time Olamide returned to Chinedu's store, the bond between them deepened. What had started as casual visits for a meal soon became something much more profound. Olamide would arrive at the store, and there would be no need for small talk. Their conversations felt natural, like they had known each other for years. Chinedu began to look forward to her visits, his heart lighter each time he saw her approaching. It wasn't just the food that drew Olamide back, it was Chinedu himself. She had tasted many dishes from countless cooks, but none had ever made her feel the way his meals did. There was a warmth and unspoken magic in every bite, as if each ingredient had been carefully chosen not just for flavor, but for the story it told. Chinedu's food was a reflection of his heart, a heart that had been overlooked, dismissed, and misunderstood for far too long. On one particular evening, as the golden glow of the setting sun stretched across the market, Olamide arrived just as Chinedu was finishing his shift. She had a full basket of fresh produce from the market, ready to prepare for her evening meals. But today, she had a different idea. She wanted to spend more time with him, to learn more about the man who had captivated her with his cooking and his heart. As she approached the store, her eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Chinedu," she said with a smile, "I was wondering, would you like to join me for a meal tonight? I've got some ingredients that I think would pair wonderfully with your cooking." Chinedu, who had never expected such an invitation, looked at her in surprise. His heart fluttered slightly in his chest, but he quickly composed himself. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice a little unsure. "You have so much to prepare, and I wouldn't want to impose." Olamide shook her head, laughing softly. "Not at all. I've always wanted to cook for you, share something different. Plus, I'm sure we could create something even more special together." Her words, spoken so simply, resonated deeply within him. It was rare that anyone, especially a woman, expressed such interest in spending time with him outside of his food stall. He had never considered that someone like Olamide might want to get to know him beyond his cooking. But here she was, offering something he had longed for, true connection. "I would be honored," Chinedu replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "Let's do it." That evening, after Chinedu closed his store, they walked together to Olamide's house on the outskirts of the village. It was a modest home, with a small garden in the front, but there was a sense of tranquility about it, an inviting warmth that mirrored Olamide's spirit. She led him inside, where the aroma of fresh herbs and vegetables filled the air. As they worked side by side, chopping, stirring, and seasoning, they found themselves talking about everything, from their childhoods to their hopes and dreams. For the first time, Chinedu opened up about his past, about growing up in a family that valued hard work and perseverance. He spoke of his parents, who had taught him the value of humility and the power of a good meal to bring people together. His family had always been large, but when he was younger, he had felt the sting of being different, of being the biggest one in the room. The other children had teased him for his size, but his parents had always encouraged him to embrace who he was. "I used to think that my size was a curse," Chinedu admitted, stirring a pot of soup. "I thought it kept me from ever being accepted. But then, I realized that it's part of who I am. My size, my heart, my food, they're all connected." Olamide listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding. "It must have been hard," she said quietly. "But look at you now. You've built something beautiful from it all. Your food, your spirit, your kindness, it's all a gift." Chinedu smiled, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "I never thought anyone would see me that way. It's always been about what others saw, what they didn't see. But with you, I feel like I'm finally being seen." As they finished preparing the meal, Olamide looked at Chinedu with a tenderness that made his heart race. "Thank you for trusting me with your story, Chinedu. I'm honored to know the real you." After they shared the meal, sitting side by side at her small dining table, a comfortable silence settled between them. The food was delicious. Olamide had added a twist to Chinedu's jollof rice, and the combination of their efforts was perfect. As they ate, Olamide noticed the way Chinedu seemed to glow when he spoke about his cooking, how his hands moved with ease as he mixed the ingredients, how the lines on his face softened when he smiled. It wasn't just the food that made him special, it was the passion, the care, and the authenticity he brought to everything he did. Olamide realized then that her feelings for him had grown beyond admiration for his cooking. She had come to care for him deeply, not just for his talents, but for the man he was. His size, which once seemed like an obstacle to so many, was part of his charm. It was what made him unique, strong, and full of life. Chinedu, too, was starting to realize something profound. As he sat across from Olamide, listening to her laugh, feeling the warmth of her gaze, he began to understand that love wasn't about fitting into someone else's mood or being what others expected. It was about being yourself, being accepted, not despite your flaws, but because of them. For so long, he had doubted his worth, believing that his size made him less deserving of love. But now, in the quiet comfort of Olamide's home, surrounded by the evidence of their shared labor in the kitchen, he realized that his heart was just as valuable as the food he so loved to prepare. As the evening wound down and the stars began to sparkle outside, Olamide stood and cleared the table. She turned to Chinedu, a serious expression on her face. "Chinedu," she began, her voice soft but certain, "I want you to know something." Chinedu looked at her, his heart pounding. "What is it?" "I'm falling for you," she said, her eyes meeting his with honesty and warmth. "I'm falling for the man who makes the best jollof rice in the village, but more than that, I'm falling for the man who sees the world with kindness, who refuses to let his size define him." Chinedu felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had never expected this moment, never thought someone like Olamide could see him the way she did. But in that instant, everything seemed to fall into place. He wasn't just the large man with the food stall anymore. He was Chinedu, worthy of love, of connection, of happiness. "I'm falling for you too, Olamide," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than you know." And in that moment, they both knew that something beautiful was beginning, something that would change their lives forever. As the weeks passed, Chinedu and Olamide's bond only grew stronger. They spent more time together, cooking, talking, laughing, and learning from one another. For the first time in his life, Chinedu felt truly seen, not for his size but for the person he was. Olamide's presence brought warmth to his world in a way that he had never imagined possible. Her love was not based on what others thought of him but on the genuine connection they shared. And as they continued to build their relationship, Chinedu began to realize that his size, which had been the source of so much rejection, was now irrelevant. Olamide saw the beauty of his heart, the kindness in his actions, and the strength in his spirit. But not everyone in the village saw their love with the same appreciation. The women of Umuahia had long admired Chinedu from a distance. His food, his wealth, and his status had made him the subject of many whispered conversations. They had once looked at him with disdain or indifference, passing by his stall without a second glance. But now, things had changed. As word spread about Chinedu's growing affection for Olamide, jealousy began to simmer beneath the surface. It was a quiet jealousy at first. Subtle glances exchanged between women as they walked past Chinedu's stall, the way they whispered behind his back when Olamide arrived to share a meal with him. But as Olamide's visits became more frequent, and as Chinedu's gentle treatment of her became more apparent, the whispers grew louder. The women could not ignore the way Chinedu treated Olamide with such tenderness and care, the way his eyes softened when she spoke, and how he always ensured she had the best of his cooking. It was clear to everyone that there was something different in the way he treated her. And it stung. One afternoon, as Olamide arrived at the market, she noticed a group of women standing near Chinedu's stall, talking in hushed voices. They didn't seem to notice her at first, but as she walked closer, their conversation paused. One of the women, Ada, who had once been a frequent customer of Chinedu's, gave Olamide a fleeting glance before turning back to the others. Olamide greeted them with her usual warmth, but there was an uncomfortable tension in the air. "Good afternoon, Ada," Olamide said, offering a friendly smile. Ada forced a smile back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Afternoon," she replied shortly. There was a slight edge to her tone that Olamide couldn't quite place. Olamide brushed it off, thinking perhaps it was just a bad day. But as she took her usual spot by the store, she noticed that Ada's eyes kept flickering to her and Chinedu, a look of frustration hidden just beneath the surface. Chinedu, who had been chatting with a couple of other customers, noticed the change in the air and came over to Olamide with his usual bright smile. "Here you go, Olamide," he said, handing her a plate of freshly made jollof rice. "I made it just the way you like it, extra spice." She smiled gratefully, her heart warmed by the gesture. "Thank you, Chinedu. I always look forward to your cooking." Ada's eyes narrowed slightly at the exchange, And as she watched Chinedu attend to Olamide with such care, a feeling of unease settled in her chest. She had once thought Chinedu was just a large, awkward man with a good cooking skill. But now, she could see something more, something that wasn't meant for someone like her. And it stung, the way Olamide had come into his life and captured his attention so effortlessly. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at Chinedu's store became increasingly charged. The other women in the village began to show their jealousy in subtle, but unmistakable ways. They would stand a little too close to Chinedu when he served food, chatting with him in a way that seemed a little more flirtatious than necessary. They would ask questions about his favorite foods, his childhood, and his business, always trying to make him feel special, though their intentions were transparent. But Chinedu, for the first time, was oblivious to it all. His heart was firmly set on Olamide, and he could feel the difference in their connection, a bond deeper than anything he had ever experienced. One afternoon, a young woman named Ifeoma, who had always been a regular customer at Chinedu's store, approached with a forced smile. She had always been polite but distant, never engaging in anything beyond casual conversation. But today, there was something different in her demeanor. "Chinedu," she said, leaning in closer than usual, "I see you've been spending a lot of time with Olamide. I must say, I didn't know you had it in you to be so attentive to one person." Her words were quoted in a honeyed tone, but the underlying message was clear: she didn't approve of the attention he was giving Olamide. Chinedu, unaware of her true meaning, smiled kindly. "Olamide is a good woman. She appreciates the food, and she's become a dear friend." Ifeoma's eyes flashed with something darker, but she quickly masked it with a polite nod. "I see. Well, I'm sure she's lucky to have found someone like you." Chinedu didn't notice the underlying sarcasm, and Ifeoma quickly moved on, but the seeds of discontent were already planted. It wasn't long before Olamide began to feel the weight of the women's jealousy. One afternoon, as she walked into the market, she noticed the whispers follow her. Women who once greeted her with friendly smiles now avoided her gaze, and a few even muttered under their breath as she passed. It was subtle, but it was enough for Olamide to notice. She knew the cause: the women were jealous of the attention Chinedu was giving her. They were jealous of how he treated her with respect and affection, how he made her feel like the most important person in the room. One evening, as Olamide sat with Chinedu after he finished his work at the store, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She had been quiet all evening, and Chinedu noticed her pensive expression. "What's wrong, Olamide?" he asked gently, wiping his hands on his apron. Olamide hesitated, then sighed, her voice filled with concern. "Chinedu, I can feel the tension in the village. The women are jealous. They don't like how you treat me. They don't like that I've come into your life." Chinedu looked at her, his expression softening. "I don't care what they think. I care about you, Olamide. I've never treated anyone the way I treat you, and that's because you deserve it. Don't let their whispers affect you." Olamide smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I know, but it's hard. I've never experienced this kind of jealousy before. They want what we have, Chinedu. But I don't want to be the cause of any more tension." Chinedu took her hand, his grip strong and reassuring. "You're not the cause. They don't see the heart of the matter. I've spent too long being judged for my size. You see me for who I truly am, and that's why I cherish you." Olamide's eyes glistened, her doubts and insecurities fading away in the warmth of his words. "Thank you, Chinedu. I'll hold on to that." As the days passed, Chinedu and Olamide continued to grow closer, their love becoming a symbol of what true connection really meant. The jealousy of the other women in the village, though still present, no longer had the same sting. Olamide learned to ignore the whispers and focus on the love and respect they had built together. And Chinedu? He had finally found someone who saw beyond his size, someone who saw the man he truly was. Together, they built a life of love, laughter, and understanding, with Olamide by his side, a beacon of light in his world.